Welcome to You Can't Say That in Court, a podcast by Rise Women's Legal Center. I'm Vicky Law.
And I'm Stephanie Melnick. We are your hosts in this conversation about survivors of violence navigating the BC family law system. We recognize that this system is colonial and causes harm to families, and that disproportionately impacts Indigenous people.
By speaking more widely about these harms, we hope to raise awareness about the challenges that survivors face as they navigate the colonial family law system. This podcast is our attempt to collectively identify the barriers and ask for positive changes to be made. Thank you for joining us. Our podcast series will discuss difficult topics such as gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, including physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, and financial abuse. Please be aware that this is a thread that is woven throughout all the episodes, and we hope that you will take care of yourselves however you need. Welcome to episode number 4 of You Can't Say That in Court. Today, we are continuing our conversation with Stephanie Hodgson. In episode 3, we discussed how we listen for violence and the challenges that some people may have in disclosing the abuse they've experienced. In today's episode, we will continue to discuss the approaches we use in our work to talk about family violence with the people we support. Yeah, I think I want to bring it back to how do we as legal professionals listen, but also hear whether or not there's violence, right? Because we've already said, people don't say, hey, red flag here, I'm the one who's experienced family violence. And Steph H, you've shared there are situations where people would share their experience with you, and you're like, well, that sounds like family violence to me, and here is the definition. I think in a lot of the professions, not just legal, I think in health as well, they use what's called screening tools. And Stefan and I are of two minds of screening tools.
We don't even like using the word screening. We're like, it's so sterile, and it's also it's very, I don't know, it's a technical term, but it also is it feels like a procedure being done to a person. I'm like, this is not what this is about. It's detecting, listening. Yeah, we have lots of thoughts about the right approaches, and maybe just a better approach, maybe not the right one, but a better approach. And that's always evolving as well. So Steph H, if you were to talk about how you detect and draw out from your clients, or just sit and listen when they are telling you about instances that you would label or categorize as family violence, how does all of that come about, especially because you mentioned earlier about shame and the embarrassment and the fear that goes along with having experienced, having been controlled or experienced some form of violence, which may or may not be legitimately recognized generally in family, like in the society, like by their friends and family. Financial abuse is very, very hard to explain to someone who doesn't get it already. What does that sound like, look like, feel like for you when you're working with your clients? Sorry, was that too big a
question with a very long answer? It's that, of course, while I appreciate that, I do not like the word screening in terms of family violence or for substance misuse or anything. That when you're screening for something, it implies a hierarchy, that there is something that's being separated out because something is better and something is like the waste product, essentially. And also, we in law, we say a lot of words that we apply legal meaning to, and in our most folks who end up in law school, someone's gonna tell you in your law school experience that in this process you may not learn how to be a lawyer, but you're going to learn how to talk like a lawyer. And
interesting.
It's very much okay, now how can you fit, how can you pass as this professional, right? We're going to take this motley crew of first year law students, and we're going to turn them all into these, not all, the majority will be these suit wearing professionals who all ascribe to, or are meant to ascribe to, the same or similar codes of professional responsibility. Anyway, screening.
Which
Not great.
then in turn creates an atmosphere where our clients don't fit because they haven't been to law school and been molded into, right? So
Yeah,
anyways, I just wanted
the
to
vernacular.
interject.
But when
Yeah.
a non-legal professional, right, when you hear screen, like and I've asked a few people, like when you hear the word screen, like what do you think of that? It's window screen every time. Window screen. What do window screens do? They keep the bugs out.
Oh,
Like
wow.
it's just not right. Like it's not great. Assessing,
Not
people
great.
don't like that either, especially anyone who's had their mental health assessed. They don't like the word assessing. I don't like the word assessing for that reason. So I do see the value in a tool of that kind, but I see it as a starting point. Always, 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 always. And
Yeah.
getting into having, I feel like anybody who does work that's providing, I'm parents counsel, I receive contracts from legal aid, I receive contracts from the Child and Youth Legal Center to represent children and youth. It's high conflict. The families that I work with generally are high conflict. Many of them are not of means, limited income, very limited financial resources a lot of the time. And that's, I mean, by default, right? You're qualifying for legal aid in this province, and certainly the financial cutoff should be much higher, because that gap, we all know, the gap between folks who can qualify financially for legal aid and folks who can afford a full freight lawyer is huge. It's not just a gap, it's a crevasse. But so it's the high conflict level. So having been doing high conflict family and child policing law for a decade plus, almost exclusively, it's it becomes second nature. It's like learning to talk like a lawyer. It's that thing of, okay, I keep the screeners in my brain, right? So I don't have to go down a list, but my ears are always open. And I am, as Vicky's known me for a while. She knows we've known each other for 15 plus years. It's a while. But she knows I'm a very literal person. So a skill I've had to train myself to learn is being less literal, is understanding that in the scheme of things, my ability to be black and white in my understanding of things is over here. And a lot of people speak more fluidly, way more fluidly than I do. So that, for me personally, that's the skill I've had to teach myself, is listening to the bits and pieces. But I'm also really good at detecting patterns. So that's why I really appreciate you know what, maybe we put together a timeline. And like a lawyer's skill is putting together a linear summary, linear timeline of the things that have happened. And certainly when I prepare for a hearing or a trial, one of the documents I make, especially if it's a family policing and I've received director's disclosure, is being able to put together a timeline so that when a client says, oh yeah, remember when that thing happened? I can go, okay, it happened over here. It happened in this specific time range. And that's around the same time that these other big things happen. Now, that's less assessing, that's more further down the road.
Right.
When I
That's
meet,
part of the strategy, but I think that's a big shock for clients,
yeah,
for people entering into the system, to understand that the only way the courts are going to hear their story and their account of what's happened is if it's in a chronological, linear fashion. It's shocking because that's not how the brain works. It's not how memory works, and it's not how we think about our experiences in this like chronological, linear time frame. So it is a skill that lawyers use very effectively, but it's a bit like it's a jarring, shocking experience to force all these memories into that structure. Yeah, Vicky.
well,
And we shouldn't expect clients to regurgitate their experiences in that
oh
way.
no, oh no,
Right? That's where is like the trauma informed practice, like that's at odds with that, right? To expect clients to be like, okay, on October 2nd, 2010, this happened, and then 2 days later that happened. That's just not how stories are told, and that's not how we share our experiences, but it is in fact how the legal system works.
Well, exactly. And so the ability to assess comes from, and we have limited time, right? I'm on duty counsel. If there are 8 other people waiting that day, we just don't have time to dive into it. Law line generally, they want us to keep it to 40 minutes, definitely under an hour if at all possible. And thankfully, we have the ability to see if other people are sitting on hold. So if there's no one on hold, I'm very happy to let somebody talk. But that can be what it is simply going, okay, like, do you feel comfortable sharing? What do you feel comfortable sharing? And being able to offer, because out of the timeline comes the themes that apply to the law, right? You get your timeline, you get your events, and then you go, okay, which event fits with, like, say, I'll use just simply because I had a number of hearings recently on continuing care orders under the CFCSA. It's okay, director's concern is family violence. Director's concern is substance use. Director's concern is housing. Director's concern is parenting skills. And a lot of that comes in, FLA, Family Law Act, family law as well. Going, okay, which bits do we use to, note the concern, but also note how a client is addressing them? They come out on the theme. So if I'm able to say, like, thematically, here's, based on our last conversation, here's kind of what, I heard you talking about. You said you wanted additional parenting time with your kids. And can you tell me a little bit about why that's not happening? And then just that sort of, provide a basic theme, like a bit of a parameter, because, and this is new junior counsel, my clients would start to talk when I started doing this work, and they would be traumatized people who were living with family violence, and very often, and they would start and they would go. And as junior counsel, I did not have the skills to step in a trauma-informed way, to step in and say, listen, okay, I respect that you have a lot to get out, but we do have limited time. And this is back in the days before they legal aid bumped up the amount of time you have for a family law file. And they've since added an additional bank you can draw on specific to family violence. So this is back in the olden days of, you got 25 general preparation hours and that's it, honey. And so people would want, and they could talk for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and like, oh my gosh, like this is cutting into our file time. What do I do? And then my focus isn't on what they're saying, that sort of thing. So providing a theme certainly helps, but then going, okay, like, what is it important that I know? What's it important that I know? Go ahead. And then being able to sit back. And I know a lot of folks want to be in person. A lot of folks want to see each other's faces, or like video, right? Video, you can see each other's faces. There's that human connection. However, I think that there is a lot of freedom in doing things on the phone, because the person doesn't have to be conscious of what they're looking like. And I feel,
interesting.
Yeah, I feel less, I feel myself less, that I need to control my own physicality more. And also, like, if I'm going into the world as a lawyer, I am wearing a suit. I'm wearing business clothes. If I'm at duty counsel, I have to go into a courtroom and appear in court. I have to be certain, we have to be attired in a certain way. But if I'm in, my office, I get to dress how I want, and put my hair in a nub, and I get to be physically comfortable, and therefore I get to be more receptive.
What I do love is how aware you are, Steph H, of your attire and the suit that you were wearing, that on one hand, it's what you need to be wearing to be taken seriously and comply with court norms. But on the other hand, it could provide a barrier with your client. So if you're talking by phone, there are some advantages to that. Some clients are going to be more comfortable. And similarly, treating this process of detecting family violence and naming it and categorizing it as a checklist, as opposed to an ongoing process. A checklist just does not work. It's not respectful. And like I had said, persevering through questions that are too invasive or inappropriate in that moment, it's painful for everybody and not useful. I think it can erode trust sometimes too, because the humans in the room, the humans in the relationship, the clients, the lawyers, support workers, whoever it is, know when they are feeling comfortable and safe to talk about the most difficult things. So I love what you said earlier about listening. It's like, it's just folded into your lawyering, is this detection and recognition of pieces of family violence.
Exactly.
I think also the checklist tool prevents us from hearing what is not being said. Because Steph, if I could just infer from what you're saying, we're listening, and sometimes, yes, we're listening for the literal words, and there's the non-literal that you were referring to. And sometimes it's what is not being said is just as important as what is being said. And so when we use the checklist, we're oftentimes like, okay, what is this person's answer to this question? And we're not asking ourselves, what aren't they answering from this question?
There are
Right?
so many things wrong with a checklist. Yeah.
Well, and it comes into that the lawyer's due diligence is that we note everything up. And actually, I've just got on my way to me a writing tablet because I uh, I got a bunged up wrist. I prefer not to do handwriting. However, in client meetings, but if I'm with a person, having a laptop with a screen, right, is a literal
Yeah.
physical barrier in between those sorts of pieces. And that's the stuff that, like, there's no way until that trust is built. And sure, there are times, especially when I'm confirming instructions, when I know that something's about to either resolve or a final order is about to be made and my client may be consenting to it, right? If they're going into a consent order, as lawyers, part of our professional responsibility is confirming what is said and what is intended, what is stated, right? And taking detailed contemporaneous notes to make sure that if anything happens in the future, if the Law Society comes a knock and we've got what was said, what happened, right? And it's that skill of, okay, what didn't happen, right? What wasn't said, those pieces. And it's, I, I mean, when we were talking about, I don't know if we're now in episode 4 and this will be in episode 3, but when we're talking about the difference in colleague education, that part of being trauma informed is not assuming that anyone has a specific education or experience skill set, but also not assuming that if you are talking to counsel, we can't. Being trauma informed means not assuming that they've never personally dealt with, right? Not just professionally, but personally dealt with family violence and that sort of thing. And that's why I think it's so important to be open about the supports that we as professionals are seeking. And one of the tools, like I have a spectacular therapist who has made my life. I mean, I've done some work too, don't get me wrong, but together I've built skills with the assistance of this person that I use in my professional life all the time. And also I've taken some of their phrasing I find very helpful in my lawyer work. And one of the things I will ask people is if they say something, if they skip over a period of time, right? Because I'm at that point, if I know the timeline, I can go, hey, back up. You just So we went from fall of this year to summer of the next year. What do you want to tell me?
Yeah.
Or they'll say, and if I hear things like that's not important, or it wasn't that big a deal to me, don't worry about it. Look at
Yeah. The
those. Like these are all the
minimizing.
phrases that
Yeah.
are like these colloquialisms, and I'll bring it back. And one of the things that I will say is, so listen, I would like to talk about that, but would that be bearable for you? Is that bearable for you right
Is
now?
it bearable? Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a good word.
is that something, can we sort of wade into that water and maybe you give me a little bit of detail now, but maybe not. And if they say no, I say, is it maybe something we could talk about in the future? Right. And that's when I make the note. That's the note. It's not, did I ask the question? It's, are we going to circle back to spring 2022? Right. That's the note. It's not, did I ask about it? Did I do the timeline? That's me talking to me in that
Right.
voice, by the way.
Right. Right.
I wasn't going to do
Well,
that voice, but here we are.
yeah.
But
Well,
that's me talking to me. Yeah.
Totally.
It's
Well, and you're getting into the purpose, right? The purpose of talking about this in a relationship with a lawyer is, yes, so that lawyers can understand context and decide and advise on whether it makes sense to bring it into the courtroom. And sometimes strategically, it might make sense and sometimes it won't. And we are going to talk about that strategy bit in future episodes because I think it's a really important piece to unpack. But there are other layers to it. Lawyers also want their clients to be safe. They want them connected to other resources in the community. They want their friends and families to understand what's happening so that they can provide additional support. I think you alluded to it earlier, Steph H, about the what are you doing in that moment with the limited time you have as a professional lawyer? There's only so much you can do with the time you have. So how do you best utilize the time while also making sure that your client is safe and supported and getting the other things they need? So I think we are firmly planted in the discussion, maybe nearing the end of the discussion about detecting family violence, talking about it with our clients. What else do you want to talk about in that space?
Well,
Yes. Well, let me tell you. Okay, here we go.
We had some really good, and by we I mean the three of us have had some good emails back and forth, and I really appreciated while we were preparing for these sessions the outline that Steph-Em and Vicky sent over. And as I was thinking of things to add to it, like I did send anyone who knows me that given the opportunity, I will send a many thousand-word email back, and much of that. Right? Much of that is my own stream of consciousness. And it's that hyper focus thing of if I need to get it out now, because if I don't, it's all over.
Right.
So
our clients feel this too. They also are
exactly
human in that way. Yes.
right. And it's yeah, being able to that, lawyer. Yeah, if I just may go back briefly to this screening piece, is that there are law offices, many law offices, generally the ones where it's privately paying clients who are being assessed and screened, and intro conversations are happening with non-lawyers, with support staff. And
yes.
While I do understand that efficiency, like I do understand we live in capitalism, right? As much as I'm not a fan, like it's where we are right now. Okay, so it's that building the trust relationship, especially with our with the folks who become our clients, who are most likely to become our clients. I do, like as mentioned, I'm a sole practitioner. I am the one you're talking to. People are often surprised if I answer the phone or if I return a phone call, and they say, "Oh, I was hoping to speak with Stephanie." Like, it's me. On the phone. And some are delighted, some are confused as to why there's not more barriers in between me and them. But it's that idea that and it is a stigma. It's a myth. Myths are what I would like to talk about. That myth that no professional worth their salt will express empathy or compassion or sympathy or sadness for what someone who is sharing these objectively very sad, a lot of the times, right? And of course, children are involved the vast majority of the time. So we are receiving incredibly sad pieces of information. So that idea, that myth that any lawyer who shows emotion isn't doing their job, that's a really big thing that I think we all, especially the three of us, Rise, so many of the excellent counsel that I work with, we are all in our own ways doing our best to combat that myth of the stone-faced killer, bulldog lawyer. It works for some people. It doesn't work for me, clearly.
No. I don't think it works for many clients either, honestly. It feels better generally. Maybe this is just my opinion, but it feels better to be a little bit human. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the clothing piece as well, right? You never know how you can best serve a client or a potential client. And it completely, again, there's that individualized assessment. Like it really does depend on the client. And so that's why not being able to see me takes off so much, right? When I'm just on the telephone with somebody, takes off so much of the pressure, because I've certainly had, when I left law school, I thought, oh, I'm going to be the lawyer. I'll be in jeans and a t-shirt. This is going to be great. I'll be casual, and my clients will know I'm casual. And I got a few people be like, "Where's your suit? Like, what are you doing?"
Or, is that right? Yeah, because they know what's taken seriously.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and like I'm going to date myself here. Like I never got to watch LA Law as a child, but I certainly saw the promos on TV. And anybody who saw Susan Day in her pencil skirt, her little jacket, and her high heels in 1984 or whatever it was, going down the clicky-clacky hall, right? That's what I thought a lawyer was for a lot of years. But yeah, if people go, where's your suit? What's your deal? And granted, this hasn't happened in a little while, but like, oh no, you're too young. You're too young.
Oh, right. Yes, right.
No, you couldn't possibly. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. You're wading into the territory of some myths and stereotypes about lawyers. And in fact, our next episode is going to be getting deeper into myths and stereotypes again around how family violence presents in court. And we are going to have another guest on the next episode. So any final thoughts?
In that case, I would just, and then really the thing that came to me when you asked, would you add anything to the outline that you sent, the initial outline, was these sort of two big categories of myths that I think a lot of folks don't realize are myths, and a lot of folks would benefit from having these myths dispelled to them. And the one big category is these, the ways that both perpetrators of family violence and abuse, but also this system that is rooted in capitalism that does say, well, what do you mean you're going to leave without money, right? Where without taking into account, oh, maybe you don't have the access to the family funds because you have not been permitted to have, right? That access has been taken from you. And things like the myth that no one will believe you, like don't share that with a professional because nobody will believe you. That you'll be under suspicion of lying if you don't have evidence, right? And that's where the recordings, that sort of thing comes in. We could have done a whole episode on evidence and what is great to have and what is maybe not. But this idea, I've had so many cases where my client says, but the other party, they have so many people who are willing to write a letter in their support.
Right.
They have letters. They sent over a sheath of letters of people who have said that they're great. And that fear of like, how am I going to come back? I don't have people who are going to write me those letters because I'm now isolated, right? Part of that, that family violence has been isolating me from my family and my community and my friends. And so I'm here to say happily that a character letter doesn't mean a whole lot of much, folks. It really just doesn't.
And see, you're hitting right on why we named the podcast. You can't say that in court because it's so tricky to know what the courts will hear, how the courts are going to change, and maybe start hearing more of the context of family violence, all that kind of thing. But that is why we're trying to get into the little dark corners that exist in all of this. Yeah.
Well, precisely. The little things where the coercion and control is such a huge part of family violence, and very slowly the law is changing. Case decisions are coming out, right? Judges are writing their reported decisions that reaffirm that yes, violence isn't just physical violence, and it's not the only time it counts as violence. It's not only when a child's directly involved, right? In family law, this old idea that if it's only happening to an adult and their kids aren't around, even if there are children in the family, in the home, that it doesn't count. And a lot of people come to me and they say, oh, no. Or they'll say, oh, I do understand that that's family violence, but not when it happened to me. When it happened to me, it was not family violence. It was, and then there's that undercurrent of, well, the overcurrent of shame, but the undercurrent of, I probably deserve it. And it's that voice again. This is another therapy thing. It's like, whose voice is saying that to you? Whose voice? And we're not counselors. That's really the big thing, is that as lawyers, we are not mental health professionals. But it's that question that I ask. Like when, in my head, I'm going, I have a feeling, and I've said this to a few folks, I have a feeling that when you hear that in your head, it's not your voice saying it, hey. And that's when I immediately go, and I have a really good therapist that you probably should do. Divert over. That's where that came from.
I just want to say thank you so much, Steph H, for joining us. It sounds like this is your first time, but definitely not the last time you'll be on this podcast. So really appreciate your time and all the knowledge that you have shared with us.
Yeah, that was really great. I love going down rabbit holes, and that was a whole bunch of rabbit holes. That was fun.
Indeed.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you both very much. And I am so honored to be a part of the podcast, and I'm sure that it will be very successful and long running. And yes, I'm very happy to return. Thank you both.
Great.
Thank you.
Everything that we have said today is not legal advice. If you or someone you know needs legal advice, please consult with a lawyer. We want to acknowledge that this podcast would not be possible without the generous contribution by Women and Gender Equality Canada, Femmes et Égalité des Genres Canada.